Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Before we get too comfortable here, I want to remind you ever so quickly that in the last week I have uploaded both my top 10 metal albums of the year video and my top 5 worst metal albums of the year video. So, if you haven't already joined those incredibly spicy debates, may I recommend you go and do so. I mean, watch this video first, of course, because why not? You're already fucking here. But maybe after that, pop on by one of those other videos and say hello. I don't know. Your call, your prerogative, you do whatever you want. You're a fucking adult, I assume. I don't know. I don't care. Let's talk about this new Deeds of Flesh record. Nucleus is the 9th studio album from Deeds of Flesh, an American brutal and technical death metal band that's been kicking around since just about 1993. Once led and spearheaded as the brainchild of one Eric Limmark, the band is now in the hands of Jacoby Kingston, who performed with the band up until 2007 and was brought back into the fold when the aforementioned Eric Limmark passed away in 2018 from sclerosis. It's true that some of Eric's final arrangements and recordings are indeed present on Nucleus, don't get me wrong, but the fact ultimately remains this is their first ever album without Eric at the helm, taking the reins, commanding the show, which puts Deeds of Flesh in a very uncomfortable kind of situation. I mean, how do you continue without a gentleman who has informed every bit of your existence? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not impossible. There are indeed some bands that have continued without their most iconic names and figures, Gwar being perhaps one of the most recent and interesting examples. But that said, while Gwar remain relatively successful, I'm willing to bet that they would be the first to admit it is damn weird to be performing without Odorous Urungus at the helm. I obviously can't say for sure if Deeds of Flesh feel the exact same way, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did, especially considering all the star power that has been brought onto Nucleus, almost as if to compensate for the loss of Eric. I mean, we've got members of Disgorge, Pathology, Decrepit Birth, Disavowed, we've got Frank Mullen of Suffocation, we've got John Gallagher from Dying Fetus, we've got Luke LeMay from Gorguts, we've got George Fisher from fucking Cannibal Corpse. And they all help, don't get me wrong, none of these gentlemen by any stretch put in a bad performance. But there are still certain elements that are missing from Deeds of Flesh. We're missing any real originality, any real creativity in the songwriting and in the production. A lot of the songs just feel kind of generic, kind of one-dimensional, sticking to the tropes, the cliches, and the stereotypes of technical and brutal death metal. The typical dystopian and sci-fi themes, a lot of symphonic intros and outros to make the album feel bigger and more important thematically and conceptually than it actually is. A lot of breakdowns, beatdowns, and technical wankery that often just kind of bleeds together into a hot, extreme mess. So much of what we're hearing on this record, while not incompetently performed, is just so derivative and predictable. Whatever you hear in your head right now when I say modern tech death and brutal death metal out loud is exactly what you get on this album. If we're being completely honest, the only times where this album grabbed any attention from me at all was when it dared to introduce a new guest star and they brought their own individual spices and flavors into the mix. Take, for instance, Catacombs of the Monolith, featuring Luke LeMay of Gorguts, which appropriately does feel a little bit more disorienting than most of the other tech death on the record, especially when Luke himself is singing and in the forefront of the sound, eventually blending elements of his emotive and avant-garde death metal with more classic tech death technique and more modern tech death production. Or the track Ethereal Ancestors featuring George Fisher of Cannibal Corpse. Lots of thick and nasty death metal goodness on this track. If If we're being honest, not only is it sonically the heaviest thing on the record, but it might be one of the best tracks on the record. Generally speaking, I like the production and the sound mix of this record as well. It's very clean, very sharp, and overall, it's a pretty trim record. A pretty lean and pretty looking steak, to be sure. It's just a shame that there isn't actually a lot of seasoning on this steak. Most of the material here, even despite some of the guest spots, still feels so generic, so watered down, so derivative of so much other tech death and brutal death metal. Take, for instance, Alien Scourge, a track so genuinely boring that I found myself skipping over it entirely on repeat listens. Or opening track Odyssey, which starts the album on such an overdramatic note that it genuinely feels kind of pretentious, with spoken word vocals talking about the apocalypse and the fate of the fucking world and all this other stupid fucking sci-fi cyberpunk buffoonery, and all these obnoxiously synthetic keyboards and string instruments, and constantly the track is building tension to the super heavy part, and you're gonna be like, wow, this album's so heavy because it's such a mind-blowing contrast we're building up to here. And then it gets to that contrast, and guess what? It's not mind-blowing because I saw it coming a mile away. I swear to God, I am this fucking close to starting a petition demanding that every death metal band in the world stop making these fucking pompous and disingenuous and pretentious fucking introductions with strings and acoustic guitars and fucking heavy guitar contrast. Just stop it. It's so fucking lame and overdone. I would probably give this record a 2. It is killed by its lack of originality, its lack of creativity, and its lack of character and consistent flavor. Again, the guest spots certainly do help, as does the generally clean and mean production value of the record, but not enough to make this a thoroughly and consistently entertaining album from start to finish, at least not for me. If you're like a really simplistic kind of meat and potatoes death metal nerd, like you're just looking for guitar solos and brutal riffs and nasty vocals, then I'm sure you'll have fun with this. But I'm just not really feeling it, especially not in a year that has been cram-packed with so much incredibly exciting, engaging, and progressive material from the world of extreme music. Like, why would I even bother with Deeds of Flesh when Acurion put out an objectively better tech death album earlier this year? One of the best metal albums of the year, fucking period, as far as I'm concerned. I don't really know for sure exactly how much of Eric's musical input is actually on Nucleus, but it is clear to me that, at the very least, Deeds of Flesh isn't just missing Eric on a personal level. 2 out of 5. This thing's pretty fucking poor. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately, and you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.